Okay, so thank you all for joining me. Today we're going to talk about ancient veteran and notable trees and how that can fit into surveying ancient woodlands. So first of all, what is an ancient tree? A tree is defined as ancient if it is in the third or final stage of its life, and this stage can go on for decades or centuries. It's old relative to others of the same species, and it could be interesting biologically, aesthetically, or culturally because of its great age. So, how old an ancient tree is depends on the species. Some species can live longer than others. So, for example, yew trees, oak trees, and sweet chestnut trees can all actually live for over 1,000 years. And some other species, including birch and willow trees, live shorter lives. So the key part for this is that it's in its third or final stage of its life. And you've got some nice examples here in the pictures. The big belly oak, an ancient tree in Wiltshire, a hollowing ash tree, an ancient field maple, and an ancient hawthorn tree. So actually this provides a nice example of the differences between species of ancient trees. You also have veteran trees. So ancient trees are veteran trees, but not all veteran trees are old enough to be ancient. Veteran trees are survivors that have developed some of the features found on ancient trees. However, veteran trees are usually only in their second or mature stage of life. So you might see signs of decay, maybe fungi or deadwood, and those are the kind of features that may start to appear in the mature stage. And although veteran trees aren't as old or complex as ancient trees, they still might have, these holes or cavities and crevices, which are important for wildlife, and they're on their way to becoming an ancient tree. They're just not as old and not as far through their life stage as ancient trees. So there's a couple of nice examples on this slide. A veteran beech tree, which looks very nice, and a veteran yew tree with this hollowed out trunk. And lastly, we talk about notable trees. So notable trees are usually mature trees which may stand out in the local environment because they are large in comparison to the other trees around them. But they don't have any obvious veteran or ancient characteristics. So these are the trees that you might notice in the landscape that are considerably larger than the trees around it, but actually they aren't ancient or veteran yet. They're sort of on their way there. We can talk about tree lifespan, and this is really what we're talking about when we're talking about ancient veteran and notable trees. So most people would think that trees keep growing taller and taller as they age, but this is not the case. Even though the crowns of some ancient trees continue to be very much alive, they become smaller due to gradual dieback and branch loss. So you can see this top right picture here. I've just added a little diagram into the slide just to demonstrate where the crown is. So actually it's where the lower branches start all the way to the top of where the highest leaves or flowers reach on a tree. With ancient trees, they actually become smaller because they gradually die back on the crown, and they also lose branches. And this starts to occur after the tree has passed its peak of maturity and is a natural process where the area of foliage and the root system are kind of rebalanced with each other. So they become less top heavy, I guess would be the way to say it. And actually this process is known as crown retrenchment, and is sometimes also described as growing downwards. So as you can see from this horizontal lifespan diagram, You've got the kind of mature tall trees that are branching up and out, and then as you progress to an ancient age, the tree kind of starts to grow downwards, so to speak, and to not be so top heavy. A small crown and a wide trunk allows a tree to withstand high winds and also avoid being uprooted. Conifers may also develop many new multiple stems following a storm or lightning damage. As a result, the appearance of the crown is flatter as well. As you can see from the photo, ancient trees usually have a large girth in comparison with other trees of the same species. So that's a very important factor, and actually one of the key things for aging a tree that we'll come to talk about. But I thought this diagram just demonstrates really nicely the lifespan of a tree. And actually, when you look at how long the tree can remain ancient for, within this diagram, that's, you know, more than 50% of the time. So actually a tree can be ancient for a very long time and still survive, even if it has, you know, dead wood or it looks like it's dying. That's actually not necessarily the case. So let's look at tree form. We've got a few different forms of tree, and this can result in differently looking ancient and veteran and notable trees. So they come in a wide variety of shapes, and let's just talk through what we're looking at on the slide. So top left, we've got a maiden tree. A maiden is an uncut tree. It hasn't been subject to pruning as a management technique and has one single trunk. So this is, yes, basically where the tree's been left to grow, and it has this single trunk. Next, you've got this multi-stem, when two or more trunks arise from or near ground level. The trunks may arise from a single tree that has branched at the base, or where a group of trees was planted very close together and they've fused at the base. Next, I've got a couple of examples of stumps, and these can also be called stools. Records of these are just as important because it was evidence that a tree was there, and especially, you know, if the stump is of considerable size, then you could infer that there was an ancient tree there, but this is all that remains. Bottom left, we've got this phoenix tree form, and phoenix trees are those which have fallen over or split apart but actually continue to grow. So you might have seen examples of these out and about, but you know, just because a tree has fallen doesn't mean that it will just die. It might continue to grow in this way, and actually if it grows to an ancient age, you know, its appearance compared to, for example, a maiden tree is going to be quite different. Next we have coppice. So coppice is a technique where the tree is cut back to ground level, and this results in the growth of many stems from the base. So hopefully everybody has seen a nice example of coppice trees, and we talked about some coppiced woodland communities in the previous webinar that we did, so hopefully you guys can remember some examples of that. Next we have pollards, and pollards are where the trunks have been cut above the height of the browsing animals and have regrown with multiple branches. This is usually around 2.5 metres from ground level. So there can be quite a distinct difference between coppice and pollard. But actually, moving on to the last tree form that we've got bottom right, you can actually have a kind of in-between tree that's called a coppard. And this can be a coppice with pollarded stems. And I thought that was a nice example, a nice illustration of those three, just to give you a definitive guide on what those should look like. So as I said, trees come in a wide variety of shapes, and this often depends on their age and then also how they've been used or managed over time. So what do ancient trees look like? Some of the key features to look for in a tree. We'll just run through this list on the left. So as we've talked about, the crown, which is that top half of the tree from the lowest branch to the highest leaf. The crown is reduced in size and in height. They have a large girth in comparison to other trees of the same species. They often have a hollow trunk, which may have one or more openings to the outside, as you can see quite nicely in the picture on this slide. They have this stag-headed appearance where you can look for kind of dead, bare or antler-like branches in the crown. And we call this kind of stag-headedness, if you think of the stag beetle or stags, you can think of that kind of structure to antlers and look for those kind of features on the branches. There may be fruiting bodies such as the heart rot fungi growing on the trunk. There could also be cavities on the trunk and on the branches, which running sap or pools of water can form in the hollows sometimes of those trees. Usually the bark is rougher and has deeper crevices. Usually they have this old look with lots of character, and sometimes you can see aerial roots growing down into the decaying trunk. So actually this tree here in the picture is a really nice example of a lot of what we've just looked through on that list. But the key feature for kind of recognising it to begin with is just that very, very large girth of the trunk. And as I said, ancient trees don't always look the same. The appearance can depend on the species and where it's growing. Several characteristics are a good clue to a tree's ancient status, and the more the tree has, the older it's likelier to be. So the more things you can tick off this list, for example, the older the tree is likely to be. Okay, looking at tree condition. The condition of the tree tells us a lot about its age and its ecological value, and so you want to look out for these kind of characteristics that I've listed here on the slide. So the first is decaying wood in the crown. So you can look for dead wood, dead branches, or this stag-headed appearance. If you're confident you can quantify the amount of dead wood in the crown with a percentage, you can kind of use that to help you determine. And actually, when you're looking at dead wood, I think the rule of thumb is if you think you could carry it all, then it's not enough dead wood. But if you couldn't possibly carry all of the dead wood, i.e. you couldn't pick up more than 3 of the branches that you find either attached to the crown still or on the floor, which is the next point, number 2, decaying wood on the ground. If there's more dead wood on the ground than you can carry, then record the tree as ancient. That's the kind of general rule of thumb. You can also find holes or water pockets, as I said, so you can look around the tree and up the trunk to see if there's any holes that would make good homes for birds or for bats. And also hollowing branches, you can check along the branches for any holes that show that the branch is hollowing. And the hollowing trunk as well, which is which can be quite evident sometimes, especially with those big gaps, and sometimes you can even walk inside the hollowed out trunks of really ancient trees because they're just so large. So that's the kind of things that you would be looking for, and what would you need when you go out in the field? Let's talk about that. So tree recording equipment, really the key things are a method of recording the location of the tree. So a 10-figure grid reference is usually preferred, but you could also maybe mark it on a map or on a site map, or you could just say, in the northwest portion of the site. It's up to you how much detail you'd like to provide. A tape measure is often very helpful to measure the girth of a tree, and maybe I actually should have also added on this list a tree species ID guide to help you identify the species of tree, because that's also important to know so that you can age it correctly. And also a camera is very helpful, because you can then submit the photos along with your record. So when we're thinking about bringing a tape measure, we want to measure the trunk girth. So actually there is a correct way to measure this according to the Woodland Trust. So I'll just quickly run through what that is. And there's quite a few features on trees that that you need to be aware of, and measuring it correctly isn't always obvious how to measure it correctly. So in the top right of this slide, I've just provided kind of a quick little guide. Obviously a maiden tree that doesn't have any low branches or anything like that should be fairly straightforward. The second one from the left has these branches that start quite low down, but as you can see, you shouldn't really be measuring the trunk above any branches. It should always be below. If they have growths on the tree, you shouldn't really include those in your girth measurement, because actually they will distort your record of how wide the girth is. They'll distort your measurement. So actually it's better to try not to include those. You're trying to get to the smallest part of the trunk, the smallest girth, before it starts branching. And again, the last picture of that also shows a growth on the side of the tree, so you would either measure above or below that. And then we've got two diagrams here of where to measure if you are measuring a tree that's on a slope, or if you're measuring a tree that's at an angle, it's maybe falling or fallen. So really the idea is to try and measure at about 1.5 meters from the ground, and that tends to be shoulder height, for the average person. Obviously you need to take that into account based on your own height. But yes, using that as a general starting point, depending on the features of the tree you're measuring, is really helpful. But as you can see here, on a tree sloping on the ground, you would want to come from uphill and measure from 1.5 up from the ground as you're uphill of the tree. And then for a leaning tree, you've got the area that's closest to the ground of the trunk, 1.5 up from there. I mean, I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it, but I think the picture does nicely, so hopefully that's clear. Make sure your tape measure is level. Don't presume that your first attempt is correct. Measure a couple of times to make sure that you've got the right measurement. Make sure the tape is flat against the trunk and not twisted, and this should help to give you a pretty accurate reading of the trunk of the girth. The girth of the trunk. A little bit more about measuring trunk girth, although I think we pretty much covered it. How do you measure a bird or a knobbly tree? If the tree has swellings at the kind of 1.5 metre mark, put the tape around the stem at various points below 1.5 metres to find the smallest girth. Keeping the tape level may include these growths. So in this situation it's okay if the tape isn't level, as this might allow you to avoid these, the knobbly parts, to measure the smallest girth. Obviously this this is very much a tree by tree basis, so just do your best when measuring. If the stems appear to grow from a single tree, treat it as though you're measuring a single stem by finding and recording the smallest girth around all of the stems at 1.5 or below, and that's the way that coppice should be recorded. So as you can see in in this diagram on the right hand side, you're including those stems at that 1.5 level, or slightly below it, to try to get the girth of the tree. So what do these measurements mean? When you're talking about measuring girth, we're trying to also take into account what species you're looking at. So that's another important part of recording ancient, veteran or notable trees, is understanding not only how big the girth is and the features of the tree, but also what species of tree are you looking at, and what would you expect to find for each of those species for it to be classed as veteran, notable or ancient. So I thought this table sums up nicely a few of our very common species in the UK. And what you've got is the list of tree species along the left-hand column and the girth measurement in metres along the top. And so as you can see, a few species you would expect to find a larger girth for them to be classed as ancient, but for other species such as field maple, rowan and hawthorn, you wouldn't actually expect to find as large a girth for them to be classed as ancient. So this is actually a really, really helpful way to understand which species are ancient based on the girth measurement that you've taken. And I should have said at the beginning, all of this information will be linked to after the webinar, but also on the web page where I'll upload the recording and also all of the resources that I've used to create this presentation. And actually I haven't created any of these myself. This has all come from the Woodland Trust because they have some fantastic guidance about measuring and recording trees, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I thought I would just add that in case you're frantically scribbling this table down trying to capture the information. So yeah, I thought that was a really helpful and interesting diagram, and actually it gives you a really good idea. So yes, the two key things are identifying the tree species and measuring the girth. So recording ancient trees as part of your woodland survey, what I would suggest is you're not doing as detailed a survey as if you were just out to survey the trees themselves. What you're doing is trying to compile a picture of the ancient woodland rather than just the trees, as I'm sure you're aware. So what I've included here on the right hand side is the two sections from the survey form that I've sent out to you. And actually we can have a look through these and just talk about all of the different things that you would want to mark. So high forest is the high canopy level where all the trees are at their kind of not their most mature stage, but they're at their peak growth, which means they're a little bit younger, if you remember. So their crowns haven't started to grow downwards. We've got coppice, which we just went over, with the tree form, which is where you're cutting the tree close to the ground and multiple stems grow up from there. You've got coppice with standards, which means some trees within an area have been coppiced, but others have been left to grow and to remain grown. That's another key feature that you'll see in a lot of ancient woodlands and worked woodlands. You've got plantation, which we have been through before. That's just where you can see some evidence of planting. Either you can see tree guards, or you can see trees that are growing in a sort of straight line or look like they might have been planted. Broadleaf and conifer, I hope are quite obvious. You've just got is basically deciduous or conifer trees. And then evidence of felling or evidence of planting, which planting you could also use tree guards as evidence. And actually, so maybe plantation would just be if the tree guards were still present but the trees were kind of fully grown. And so that's kind of one way to indicate the kind of tree forms that you have and the kind of trees you have. And then when we're talking about ancient, veteran or notable trees, you've got this living features section in which you've got trees, pollards, stubs or stalls, outgrown hedges and notable trees. So really what I've tried to do here is to not go too specific on the details, and actually just give you a chance to indicate what you can see without needing to, measure or really get into the detail of recording the trees. I mean, it is actually very helpful to have that information, but if you're in a huge site and you don't want to be there too long for your survey, you can easily just indicate, you don't know if the tree is ancient, veteran or notable, but all of them will be notable, if you see what I mean, because ancient and veteran trees can fall under that category as well. So I hope that gives you some guidance as to how to document this information on the survey form that I've provided. And actually a helpful thing to do before you go out to survey sites is to look on the ancient tree inventory map. And this is on the Woodland Trust website, which I'll provide a link after the webinar. And you can go on and you can search for a postcode or a grid reference or a street or a town. And you can find these little pins that they've put on the map to show trees in the landscape that somebody else has recorded as either veteran, notable or ancient. So I think the purple pins are the notable trees, the green pins are veteran trees, and I think they have orange pins for the ancient trees. And so actually this can help you on your way with your survey, because you can just, you can actually see the locations of the trees and figure out a route that way to just kind of see them and say, oh, there they are. Or even sometimes the website has picture records sometimes, so that's also helpful if you want to just have a quick look on the website and see, okay, there's an ancient tree and it looks like this. When I'm out surveying the site, I'll have a quick look around that area and see what I can find. But yes, this just kind of helps you on your way. Another thing that can be helpful are historic maps. So the National Library of Scotland website has a fantastic resource of this side-by-side mapping viewer. So you can look at an old map and compare it to a new one. The map that I've got here on the left is the OS 1888 map, and then I've just put the aerial photography, or it might actually be satellite, I can't quite remember, on the right. But as you can see, I've just highlighted a few trees on the historic map and shown that some of them are still present today. So this might give you a good clue. Obviously it's quite difficult in woodlands. As you can see around the border of this field there are woodlands and they're full of tree symbols, which is a little bit tricky, but sometimes boundary trees or ones out a little bit further into maybe wood pasture and parkland, like you've got a good example of here. This can be very helpful to find out, and to find out where those veteran and ancient trees might be, and even where they once were, where they might not be anymore, where there might just be a stump or a stall. So the one that's furthest to the left, you can see no longer exists on that aerial photography, but actually there seems to be something there still from where the tree was, so it might just be worth having a look to see if there's a big stump or stall there. And another really interesting thing to have a look at before you go out to survey, because you can see really clearly from these maps some definitive details about the site. And particularly boundary trees are really important, and they're often the ones that are left in and that you can find evidence of, and they're usually at the corner of a site or on a definitive boundary. And they can be some really nice trees that you can go and find. but I do understand it can be quite tricky to know where to look for them. So using historic maps and the Ancient Tree Inventory website can give you a good, good start if that's what you want to record. So what I've talked about is kind of a little bit of a broad brush approach. If you're really interested in documenting the trees and making a specific record for the tree beyond the field survey that you're doing for me, you can actually submit your tree records on the Ancient Tree Inventory website, and they will be verified by the Woodland Trust's verifiers and added to that website that I just showed you. So this is going to be a much more detailed tree survey, and you'll need to submit a separate record on the Woodland Trust website if you're interested in doing this. They have loads and loads of information on their website and lots of great resources and guidance, as I mentioned earlier. And I've just put the website down the bottom of the slide, www.ati.woodlandtrust.org.uk/add-a-tree/ and that will take you to the page of recording the trees that you find. And you can see here on their tree recording form, you're actually giving a very detailed picture of what is going on with the tree, more than girth and species, but also how much of the crown is deadwood, what hollowing branches there are, the indications of hollowing trunk, deadwood on the ground, and then also wildlife. So fungi, bats, all those kind of things that I'm not asking you to provide that detail for the ancient woodland surveys, but equally, if you're there and you see a tree and you would like to record it and put it on the map, I thought I would just put a slide in here to let you know that that is also a possibility. So lastly, I'll just talk through which resources there are out there to help, and actually a lot of what's come from a lot of what I put on the slides today has come from these resources, and they're all from the Woodland Trust. Surprise, surprise, as I keep mentioning them. So they've got these two really fantastic booklets, PDFs, available for free online. The Ancient Tree Inventory, mapping the oldest and most important trees in the UK. That's a really good one. And an ancient tree guide for what are ancient, veteran and other trees of special interest. And the links that I've put here are to those two, and then the third link that I've put is just to the Ancient Tree Inventory that I've mentioned. And yeah, that's really it for today. I think that it's really helpful to help paint a picture of a woodland when you can talk about not only the species of trees in the woodland, but also the age of them, or the presence of those really those trees that are later in their lifespan compared to the surrounding trees. And so I hope you found that helpful.